is Darren Jones. I'm Head of Global Technical Development at deVere Group. And today I'm going to talk to you about some changes that will be introduced by the new Labour government and were announced on the 31st of July 2024. So the agenda, I'm first of all going to have a look at the taxation of non-UK domiciles, how it is now and how it will change. The changes to UK residency non-dom rules, what people know as res non-doms, and the introduction of a new residency-based system of taxation. I want to have a look at how that will affect excluded property trusts, a common planning tool used by res non-doms and indeed non-doms who will move to the UK at some point in the future, and also want to have a look at how it will affect British nationals. So first of all, let's make sure we understand the difference between residency and domicile. So residency is where you live day to day, week to week, year to year. It's driven by the number of days you spend in the country where you are. In the UK, typically, if you spend more than 90 days there, you will probably be resident in that particular tax year. Whereas domicile is driven more by where is your long-term home. So you acquire a domicile at point of birth. It's called your domicile of origin. You follow that of your father, and that stays with you for life. It can be overridden by a new domicile of choice, which is driven by where you move to. Maybe you move to a new country, you establish a life there, you intend to stay there as your long-term forever home. And that could then establish a new domicile of choice. And then the third way to be domiciled, at least in the UK, is by what we call a deemed domicile. So you spend 15 of the previous 20 tax years resident there. So it's clearly your long-term home and you're deemed then to be domiciled in the UK. So that's the difference. Residency day to day, year to year, and your domicile, your long-term home. So if we look at the current rules for particularly res non-doms, it's driven by something called the remittance basis of taxation, or at least that is a choice that a res non-dom can use. They can either choose to pay tax on their global income and global gains, or they can choose to use the remittance basis. So the remittance basis is available for up to 15 years. For the first 7 years, there's very little financial consequence of it. And it means that any foreign income or foreign gains that you generate in a given tax year, unless you remit it into the shores of the UK, you can choose to not pay the tax and claim the remittance basis. Bit of a crazy situation, really, because not only do the UK government then not get to tax the foreign income and gains, but also you're precluded literally forever remitting it to the UK shores for fear of it being taxed retrospectively, which it likely would be. So it's a fairly silly situation to have. You have that in place for up to 7 years without any consequence. For the following 5 years to the 12th year, you can pay an annual levy of £30,000. And then once you go beyond 12 years, the levy rises to 60. Once you get to 15 years of UK residency, then of course you're likely deemed domiciled anyway, but you can no longer claim the remittance basis. So that's the current system that is being changed and replaced by the new rules. From an inheritance tax point of view for non-UK domicile people, you only pay tax at the moment on your UK-based assets. And if you die as a non-dom, the UK then will not be able to tax your global assets. So as long as you keep, for example, liquid assets outside of the UK, you won't pay inheritance tax on them when you pass away, only your UK status assets. Whereas a UK domicile person pays tax on their global estate. As a result of this, the non-domicile people can use something called an excluded property trust, which actually extends this potential IHT-free status for non-UK based assets. So what happens here is when you're still non-UK domiciled, you place your non-UK assets into a trust. It's a settlor included trust, and it's a discretionary trust. And the settlor himself, therefore, as an included as a beneficiary, can benefit from the trust. So there's not really a true gift. You're giving it to the trust, but you can ask the trustees to send it back to you. Now, as long as you create that trust as a non-dom, then even if you become domiciled later, it doesn't fall back into your estate for inheritance tax purposes, yet, as I've just described, you still have access. So very common planning tool for non-doms who might at some point in the future become UK domiciled by moving there and making the UK a long-term home. So as a result of that slight unfairness and what seems to be not at all a level playing field, the Labour government are now suggesting that they will introduce some new rules to combat this. It was first mooted by the previous UK government, the Tory party, in the budget in spring of 2024, and Labour are largely implementing the rules as well going forward now. So what are the new rules? Well, if you move to the UK, we are now going to have what we call a residency-based system of taxation. So the remittance basis will go away. And for the first 4 years of moving into the UK, you will not be paying income tax in the UK on your foreign income and your foreign gains, what is being called the FIG rules. So as long as you have 10 years of non-residency prior to moving to the UK, the first 4 years, you'll be able to generate income, generate gains internationally, and indeed remit that money into the UK economy, and you will not be taxed on it. So that's quite a fundamental change from where we are today. The one likely consequence of claiming this system of taxation is that you will probably not be able to claim personal income tax allowance and capital gains tax allowance in the years, for the 4 years that you're able to claim this. You may not have those two allowances available to you. Not 100% clear yet, but that's the likely position when we see the detail. So what the Tories suggested in the budget of spring 2024 is now being largely implemented by Labour, but one or two changes. So let's just look at the differences. So the Tories suggested there would be some transitional rules for existing residents who are already claiming the remittance basis of taxation. And they said that for the 25-26 tax year, any foreign income would only be taxed at 50% of the prevailing rate. The Labour Party have now said that's not the case. As of the 6th of April 2025, the new rules will come in, and even those currently claiming the remittance basis will pay full tax if they've been there for more than 4 years. Any of the 4 years left, they'll still be able to claim the new FIG rules. The Tories also said in 25-26 tax year that any gains that were already inherent internationally and you were claiming the remittance basis for, they would rebase to 2019's value any of those gains. So if you had an asset that you bought 15, 20 years ago with lots of gains in it, and you were maybe just not selling it and thinking about not remitting it into the UK, if you did sell it, or what we're now the position that the Tories introduced was that in 2019, the value that it was the case at the time would be the base value for any subsequent capital gains tax. Labour have said, yes, we'll introduce something similar. We will call it a rebasing date, and that date is yet to be confirmed. We need to see the October budget. It's now been confirmed as the 30th of October 2024, when more detail will be announced. The Tories also said for the 25-26 and the 26-27 tax year that any unremitted foreign income and gains, so this is gains that were on the remittance basis and were just sat there unable to be remitted into the UK economy, would have a 12% tax charge if the taxpayer chose to bring them in. Labour have said they will not commit to the 12% tax charge just yet, but they will have a temporary repatriation facility. I guess this is to encourage people to remit unremitted gains into the UK economy. Time frame will be confirmed, and the tax rate will be confirmed most likely in the budget on the 30th of October this year. So those are the new rules for income tax and capital gains tax. The new rules for inheritance tax are slightly different, and we are still going through not so much a consultation period, but a discussion period with industry interested parties. But what the Chancellor said on the 29th of July this year is as follows. So let me read the whole part of the statement that is relevant to us. The government envisages that the basic test for whether non-UK assets are in scope for inheritance tax from the 6th of April 2025 will be whether a person has been resident in the UK for 10 years prior to the tax year in which the chargeable event, including death, arises, with provision to keep a person in scope for 10 years after they leave the UK. So the key words for me here are non-UK assets and whether a person has been resident in the UK for 10 years prior to the tax year in which the chargeable event arises. And it goes on to say, with provision to keep a person in scope for 10 years after leaving the UK. So this is introducing something that the press have picked up on as a nose and tail. So essentially, if you have been living in the UK for less than 10 tax years when you pass away, you will probably not be paying inheritance tax on your non-UK assets. But as soon as you've lived in the UK for 10 or more years, been resident there for 10 or more years, you will fall into a global system of inheritance tax. And then furthermore, if you then leave the UK, having been there for 10 or more years, you leave the UK, you will need to survive or not have an inheritance taxable event for a further 10 years to avoid the tax entirely. Now, whether there will be any tapering provisions and so on, we'll see in the detail in the budget. So non-resident for 10 years currently, you move to the UK, you have a further 10 years before you fall in scope for inheritance tax fully. And once you've been there for those 10 years, you will pay inheritance tax globally. Prior to that, you will probably not pay tax on your non-UK assets. Once you've been there for 10 years, if you leave again, you have to be away for 10 further years before you completely fall out of scope for UK inheritance tax. So no longer driven by your domicile. This is now a residency-based system of taxation, and it's the 10-year clock that matters. The new rules that the Conservatives proposed, well, they initially said they'd have a consultation period, and they pretty much proposed what I've just gone through there that Labour have confirmed in July on the 29th. But they're not having a consultation period, as I said, they're just taking some stakeholder feedback. We definitely will move away from domicile basis to a residency basis. That's retained. And Labour have also said that the rules will be 100% unchanged until the 6th of April 2025. What they have said, though, is that we'll make some changes for excluded property trusts. Let's have a look at exactly what the indication is for those types of trusts. So people that have existing discretionary trusts, settler included, with non-UK assets in it, what we call excluded property trusts, which historically have been, as I said earlier, they will prevail and be effective even if you subsequently become UK domiciled. The proposal now is for that not to be the case. So I need to read a fairly extended paragraph from the announcement in order to make this clear. So the government will end the use of excluded property trusts to keep assets out of scope of IHT. The government intends to change the way inheritance tax is charged on non-UK assets which are held in such trusts, so that everybody who is in scope of UK inheritance tax pays their taxes here. The government recognises that trusts will already have been established and structured to reflect the current rules, so is considering how these changes can be introduced in a manner that allows for appropriate adjustment of existing trust arrangements, whilst ensuring that the treatment of all long-term residents of the UK is the same for inheritance tax purposes. Confirmation of the new rules and their detailed application, including transitional arrangements for affected settlers, will be published at budget following external engagement. Okay, lots of words. Let's pick out the key words. So they're going to end the use of excluded property trusts, and they're going to change the way inheritance tax is charged on non-UK assets held in such trusts, so that everyone who is in scope for UK inheritance tax pays their taxes. So we are definitely going to see excluded property trusts, certainly from April next year, no longer work for those who have been resident there for 10 or more years. But they do go on to say the government recognises that trusts will already have been established and structured to reflect the current rules. So it's considering how these changes can be introduced in a manner that allows for appropriate adjustment of existing trust arrangements, whilst ensuring that the treatment of all long-term residents of the UK is the same for IHT purposes. So the detailed application, including transitional arrangements, will be published at budget. So that to me implies that they will not just change all the rules and make old excluded property trusts fail. There will be some transitional rules to allow for some adjustment. But what those details will be, we don't yet know. So I've just put some educated guesswork on the slide here of possible effects on existing excluded property trusts. And I've just come up with 3 potential options. So it is possible that they could entirely fail and that I'm misinterpreting the statement on the previous slide. So maybe from April 2025 onwards, those with an existing excluded property trust, maybe the entire assets, unless you restructure the trust in some way, perhaps exclude the settlor from benefiting or make some changes to it in some way, maybe they'll fall in scope once the settlor has been UK resident for 10 or more years. I don't personally feel that's what will happen, but it is possible. The second option I've put on there is a marker in the sand. Maybe the value as of a given date in time will be the value that remains excluded should you become subsequently resident for 10 or more years, and maybe then it's only any growth or further contribution to the trust which will be taxable. That's also a possibility. I do feel, though, more likely is possibility number 3, where they'll just prevent further top-up. So maybe the existing trust value, the existing trust itself is still out of scope for inheritance tax, even if you become resident for 10 or more years. But as soon as you make a change, maybe put more money in to the trust, or maybe if you change some structuring within the trust itself, it will be brought into the new rules. So we don't know. The detail will give us a better clue when we get a budget on the 30th of October in 2024. Maybe it will introduce some new planning opportunities. We'll have to wait and see. But governments do not like closing down sales. And I think the key thing there is, I mentioned the phrase, there will be a given date in time at which these changes could take effect. So is there an opportunity right now, between now and April next year, perhaps to establish an excluded property trust if you believe that option 2 or 3 may apply? And that's quite possible. So maybe the new changes will come into effect on the 6th of April. I think there is also a possibility they could be from the 30th of October when the budget statement is actually delivered, or maybe the given date in time might be the 29th of July when Rachel Reeves stood up and actually delivered the statement and said, I am going to make these changes and make excluded property trusts fail. So we'll see. The detail will come out on the 30th of October. So what does this mean for current UK domicile people? Could they take advantage of some of the new rules? And I think the answer is quite possibly yes. So someone who is UK domiciled, who has been non-resident for more than 10 years, moving back to the UK, will they also get the first 4 years where foreign income and foreign gains is not taxable? And I think, again, the detail will come out in budget, but there is a distinct possibility. So maybe someone has a rental property overseas, they move to the UK for the first 4 years of living there. Any income that they generate from that foreign property, even if they remit it to the UK, could be tax-free. Likewise with foreign bank accounts and so on, generating interest, maybe sell that property, generate a gain. For the first 4 years of moving back to the UK, quite possibly even UK citizens, UK domicile people, as we know it today, could possibly benefit from that. Likewise with inheritance tax, if they've been non-resident for more than 10 years and moved back to the UK, or even before they move back to the UK, be non-resident for more than 10 years, will that mean that they escape inheritance tax on their non-UK situs assets, just like the proposal is for the non-doms? I don't think they're going to have a domicile statement within the new rules, and that is likely, therefore, to be beneficial for the British expats that are overseas for more than 10 years. And indeed, when they move back to the UK, would they have a further 10 years where they're no longer, or they're not in scope for inheritance tax, other than on their UK assets, their foreign assets, perhaps excluded? So devil will be in the detail. We need to see that in October at budget on the 30th of October. So watch this space. As things come out, we will record further videos and release them. We're not expecting any more announcements, though, of significance before budget. Okay, that's all I had to say today. Thank you for watching. If you have any further questions, please reach out to your usual deVere advisor. And of course, we're always here to help and answer questions for you. Thanks very much indeed for watching today.